It began with a smirk. Pam Bondi leaned back and sneered, calling Jasmine Crockett just another angry Texan with a mic. But minutes later, that mic turned into a weapon. Crockett didn't just respond. She detonated a hidden memo, a shadowed past. And the system Bondi once defended turned on her. The room didn't just freeze, it cracked. Bondi's hands shook, her past caught up, and America watched. How did one woman's fury become the explosion Washington never saw coming? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing chamber was suffocating, cameras crowding the aisles and reporters leaning forward for every sound. At the witness table, Pam Bondi sat with her chin raised, eyes gleaming with smug confidence, a faint curl of contempt on her lips. She didn't just sit there, she radiated control, her posture daring anyone to challenge her authority. The atmosphere bent toward her presence, as if the fight had been decided before it began. Then the clerk's voice rang out, introducing Representative Jasmine Crockett. As the doors opened, an opposition congressman leaned to his mic and sneered, "Here comes the angry one from Texas." His voice carried through the chamber, sharp enough to embed itself in the record. A ripple of mocking laughter followed, quick but poisonous, meant to cut before Jasmine even spoke. The words hung like a blade in the air. Jasmine stepped forward, heels striking the floor with steady precision. For a moment, the cameras caught her hand tightening into a fist, a flash of raw instinct. But her face stayed cold, her eyes locked ahead with unflinching focus. She moved through the tension as if untouched, her silence sharper than any reply. The insult lingered in the chamber like smoke. No longer a joke, but the first open strike of battle. The chamber was still tense from the sting of the label. When Pam Bondi struck the next match, she leaned forward slowly, like a woman in no rush because she already knew the ending. Her voice came out sugar smooth, soft enough to sound civil, but every word was carved to cut. "Some prefer shouting over reason," she said, dragging the sentence just long enough to let it hang like a dare. Her tone didn't rise, but the meaning landed hard. The words were gentle on the surface, yet soaked in condescension beneath. She didn't stop. Her hand rested lightly on the desk as she continued, her smile as polished as a blade. "Emotion can never replace intellect." A few heads nodded. One aide scribbled the quote like it came from scripture. Bondi was building a trap, carefully, elegantly, and laying it brick by brick in front of the room. She wasn't calling Jasmine out by name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she meant. Then came the final blow. "Passion without discipline is nothing but chaos." She said it softly, but the room reacted like she'd dropped a glass. Silence followed, not out of respect, but because everyone knew it was a line meant to draw blood. No yelling, no finger-pointing, just a performance wrapped in civility and dipped in venom. And that was her power, cutting someone down without ever raising her voice. After the third line, Bondi paused, not because she was finished, but because she wanted to watch it land. She turned her head slowly, locking eyes with Jasmine across the table. Her smile shifted, just slightly, into something meaner. Not gloating, not mocking, just cold and deliberate. It was the kind of smile that said, "React. I dare you." A few Republican lawmakers leaned back in their chairs and nodded, as if the scene had met their expectations. Their approval wasn't loud, but it was clear. They saw Bondi's words as truth, not insult. Jasmine, in their eyes, was already framed. Too loud, too emotional, too much. And Bondi? She had just confirmed the narrative without ever saying her name. For a moment, the room thought Jasmine would stay silent, until she didn't. She stood slowly, no papers in hand, no aide at her side, no need for anything but her voice. The sound of her chair sliding back echoed louder than it should have. The chamber froze, caught between breath and heartbeat, as if it knew whatever came next would change everything. Jasmine didn't adjust the mic. She didn't clear her throat. She simply spoke, her voice low, steady, and unshakably calm. "I didn't know I was angry until this room told me I should be." The words sliced through the still air, not as an outburst, but as a truth dragged into the light. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight, like something that had been waiting years to be said. No one moved. No one whispered. It was the kind of sentence that made even the walls stop listening to themselves. She let the silence stretch for one beat, then two, then three, before she continued. Her voice didn't rise, but each word hit harder than the last. Too emotional, too aggressive, too unstable. I've been called all those things for doing what men in this room call debate. Her eyes scanned the front row, daring anyone to flinch. Her tone stayed composed, but the undercurrent was pure steel. She wasn't asking for understanding. She was reclaiming ground. Then she turned fully to Bondi, her body facing the witness table, her stare razor sharp. For a moment, it felt like there were no walls between them, just two women and one unforgivable truth. You don't get to call my truth anger while your own fear gets dressed up as patriotism. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't break. It burned. It exposed. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was stunned. Bondi blinked, caught slightly off guard, the edges of her smile faltering for the first time. The room didn't gasp, but it shifted visibly. Jasmine hadn't just responded. She had flipped the script and lit it on fire. What had begun as a quiet insult was now unraveling in real time. And for one sharp electric moment, the entire chamber understood. This was no longer about labels. It was about truth. And who was brave enough to say it aloud? And just when the silence threatened to collapse the room, Jasmine moved, and the entire chamber moved with her. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped forward with the calm control of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do. Her hands didn't shake. Her gaze didn't flicker. She turned slightly toward the chairwoman and said, clear and firm, "Madam Chair, I'd like to present visual evidence to the committee." It wasn't a request. It was a statement. And within seconds, the main screen behind the witness table came alive. The lights dimmed, just slightly, but the tension sharpened like a blade. The footage began. The screen showed a courtroom, not this one, but one far from D.C., with worn carpets and tired judges. A young black man sat at the defendant's table, hands cuffed, shoulders slumped. A mother sobbed quietly behind him. The prosecutor's voice droned on, dismissing witness after witness, as if the outcome had already been written. This was a case the public never saw, but Jasmine did. She had stood in that courtroom. She had fought for that man when the system left him for dead, and the video told the story better than words ever could. It showed her cross-examining a crooked officer. It showed her dragging out a falsified timeline. It showed her holding up a photo that proved the witness had lied. And it showed the judge reluctantly setting the man free, his hands still shaking as the cuffs were removed. This was no theory. This was lived justice. Raw, messy, real. Gasps didn't erupt, but they simmered. The room sat frozen, every screen flickering with the weight of a system that nearly destroyed an innocent life. Jasmine didn't turn to look at the audience. She didn't need to. The footage had done what it came to do. It silenced everyone who had ever said she was too loud, too emotional, too angry to do her job. But she wasn't done. With a slight nod to the staff, she cued the second video. And this time, the air changed again. Pam Bondi appeared on the screen, poised at a university form, speaking with that same practiced charm she carried today. The date flashed in the corner. 2 years earlier. No edits, no cuts. Just her words. Clean, direct, and damning. "She's more concerned with feelings than facts," Bondi said, coolly, confidently, smiling as the audience chuckled. She wasn't talking about policy. She was talking about Jasmine. The room now felt like it had stopped breathing. Bondi didn't flinch, but she didn't smirk either. Her face remained stone still, but the energy had shifted. Cameras turned toward her without mercy. Every reporter knew what they had just witnessed, a public smear exposed on government record. Jasmine stepped forward once more, this time with a folder in her hand, thick, stamped, and heavy with proof. She didn't wave it around. She didn't grandstand. She simply walked up to the committee desk and placed it down with precision. Inside, transcripts from that wrongful conviction case, sealed affidavits, a judge's written apology, and documentation of her legal team's investigation. Every page bore government stamps. Every signature had weight. These were not sound bites. These were receipts, undeniable, unshakable, unspinnable. She returned to the mic, looked directly ahead, and spoke just 8 words. 8 words that cracked the silence like thunder. Anger didn't bring me here. Injustice did. She didn't follow it with a speech. She didn't need to. The line hit so hard it echoed inside people. It changed the rhythm of the room. It told every person watching, from the interns to the senators, that Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to perform. She had come to dismantle a lie with the only thing louder than outrage: truth. No one moved. Not even Bondi. Her fingers, resting on the desk moments earlier, were now curled just slightly, tense. The second climax had arrived. And this time, Jasmine wasn't the target of the moment. She was the force reshaping it. The truth had landed, and the silence that followed didn't protect Pam Bondi. It exposed her. She adjusted her mic with a stiff hand, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her voice, once smooth and measured, came out thinner now, tightened by tension, frayed at the edges. "Let's not turn personal insecurity into public policy," she said, her tone coated in bitterness she could no longer hide. The words fell flat, but the sting in them was deliberate. "We're here for solutions, not self-promotion." Her smile twitched, caught somewhere between smug and shaken. It was clear. She was no longer answering the room. She was defending herself. The shift in energy was instant. A murmur rolled through the chamber like a wave breaking. Chairs shifted. Pens froze mid-sentence. Several lawmakers leaned back, expressions darkening with visible discomfort. The remark had gone too far, and everyone knew it. Bondi hadn't just disagreed. She'd made it personal. She had stepped out of the role of a composed witness and straight into the posture of an attacker. From one of the center rows, a moderate voice cut through the noise, not loud but clear enough to sting. "That was a low blow," a centrist congressman muttered, loud enough for the mics to catch. No one corrected him. No one objected. In fact, heads began to nod. Quietly, slowly. The kind of nods that carried weight. Not agreement, but disapproval. Across the table, Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't answer. She didn't even blink. Her eyes stayed locked on Bondi, unwavering, silent, loaded. And in that stillness, something shifted again. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was resistance. It wasn't passive. It was pressure. Each second that passed without a word from her made Bondi's outburst look smaller, pettier, more exposed. And for the first time since the hearing began, the room didn't feel tilted in Bondi's favor anymore. She had crossed the line, and now the chamber was beginning to turn. Jasmine didn't just bring evidence. She brought receipts, and each one came with a name, a date, and consequences. She rose without a tremble. The room had already shifted. Now she was here to lock it in place. She faced the chair with steady poise and spoke into the mic. "Madam Chair, I'd like to submit a few documents into the record." She opened the folder and lifted the first document with deliberate calm. "This is an independent investigative report, dated October 2021, from the Office of Civilian Oversight in Hillsborough County, Florida." She glanced at Bondi, then continued. "It confirms that Ms. Pam Bondi personally contacted the state attorney's office and requested their consider pursuing charges against Officer Brandon Kepler, who was recorded slamming a 17-year-old black teenager, unarmed, to the pavement during a routine traffic stop." She held up the highlighted page. The teenager suffered a fractured collarbone and internal bleeding. The officer stayed on active duty, and Ms. Bondi used her title to shield him. The tension was immediate. Jasmine didn't flinch. She kept her tone level, but her words struck like iron. She didn't advocate for reform. She didn't seek justice. She picked a side, and it wasn't the side lying in a hospital bed. Then she stared directly at Bondi and delivered it without blinking. "Let's stop pretending this was oversight." It was protection, and it came from someone now lecturing this chamber on discipline. Before the weight of that could settle, Jasmine picked up the second set of papers. "Now this," she said, letting the page rest on the table, is an internal email string dated March 14th, 2023. She tapped the corner of the printed thread. In it, Ms. Bondi refers to Congresswoman Lydia Morales as, quote, mentally unstable and a risk to national optics, after Representative Morales criticized Ms. Bondi's position on live television regarding prison privatization contracts. The murmurs began. Jasmine let them rise, then cut through them with steel. She didn't say Morales was wrong. She didn't debate the facts. She discredited her mental stability in writing and copied it to 7 staffers. Then quieter. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a joke. It was written, sent, and archived. She stood straight, her voice now calm as glass. Some words don't need repeating. They condemn themselves. Bondi's hand moved instinctively to her mic, but her voice betrayed her first. I don't recall those emails. No one believed her. Then, almost like a line from the script of justice itself, a lawmaker leaned forward and said what the whole room was thinking. If you don't recall, then you don't rebut. No applause, no gasp, just stillness. The kind that follows after something has finally, fully broken. The blow had landed, but Bondi hadn't accepted it yet. What followed wasn't defense. It was unraveling. She leaned toward the microphone, not with control, but with desperation. Her voice, once steady, practiced, even smug, now trembled like the floor beneath her had cracked. I never intended. That is to say, my role was misinterpreted, she murmured, each word collapsing under the weight of panic. Her throat tightened mid-sentence. Her thoughts spiraled faster than her mouth could follow. Nothing she said reached the power it once held. Her right hand fumbled with a pen she no longer needed. Her left hand discreetly wiped sweat off her palm onto the inside hem of her blazer. But it was too late. Everyone saw it. Her face, once set in polished defiance, now trembled under the heat of exposure. Her pupils darted across the room as if searching for an ally, a cue card, a door. But the room had gone still. No one blinked. No one saved her. Her own silence, once used as a tactic, now returned as a sentence. A camera zoomed in, cold and merciless. The broadcast didn't blink. The audience saw everything. The tension clenching her jawline, the subtle quiver in her lips, the growing sheen of sweat along her temples. For the first time, she didn't look like the witness. She looked like the accused. Her armor had cracked, and under it, fear, raw and real. Then came the strike. Not a voice, not a shout, but the sound of order reclaiming its space. Miss Bondi, please maintain order, the chairwoman said, her voice sharp and free of sympathy. Then she reached for the gavel and brought it down once. Not in anger, but in control. A single hit, the kind of hit that ends illusions. The sound rang out through the chamber like a stone skipping across glass. Bondi flinched. Whispers began. But they didn't come from the press. They came from the dais. Lawmakers, colleagues, enablers who now wanted distance. One leaned in just close enough to his mic and muttered, "She's done." Another, voice lower but just as surgical, followed, "She has no more room to spin." No one corrected them. No one protested. Even the silence didn't defend her anymore. It was just waiting for the moment to collapse entirely. And through it all, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't gloat. She didn't react. She sat still, hands folded on the table like a woman who had already read the final page of the story. Her face was calm, eyes steady, breath controlled. She didn't look triumphant. She looked prepared, like this was never a battle for her. It was a process, one that had now reached its most predictable end. Pam Bondi hadn't just been challenged. She had been undone, by her own record, by her own words, and by the silence that finally turned against her. In politics, silence can be survival or surrender. And today, the silence said everything. For most of the hearing, Congressman Richard Halden, an old-school Republican from Kentucky, had watched from behind his folded hands. He hadn't spoken, hadn't reacted, just sat with that practiced neutrality politicians wear like armor. But when Jasmine finished and the gavel rang out, something shifted in him. He slowly rose to his feet, not in protest, not in objection, but with a quiet finality. Then he did something no one expected. He turned slightly toward Jasmine Crockett and gave a single, solemn nod. The room caught it instantly. The nod wasn't loud, but it was thunder inside that chamber. A high-ranking Republican, publicly acknowledging the woman his party had tried to dismiss. Cameras swung to catch it. Staffers glanced at one another, whispering fast behind clenched jaws. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't react. But power had just tilted, and everyone felt it. It didn't stop there. A moderate congresswoman from Arizona looked across the table, then set her pen down, leaned back in her chair, and gave a slow, clear nod in Jasmine's direction. Moments later, a freshman representative from Indiana, one who had previously praised Bondi's credentials, removed his glasses, exhaled through his nose, and folded his hands. He didn't look at Bondi. He looked at Jasmine, eyes full of reluctant recognition. And then he gave the slightest incline of his head, measured, unmistakable, a quiet surrender of narrative. Outside the hearing room, the media wasn't whispering anymore. They were recording it in real time. Behind the glass, producers mouthed urgent signals. One CNN correspondent leaned into her mic, face pale with awe, and said what the room itself hadn't dared to. Bondi just collapsed. Live. The sentence jumped from feed to phone to headline in under a minute. There was no spin fast enough to catch it. No damage control polished enough to unsee what just unfolded. Pam Bondi had been publicly, undeniably unseated, and the country was watching it happen frame by frame. Inside, Bondi's body told the rest of the story. Her shoulders dropped forward, no longer squared with authority. Her chin tilted down. Her eyes, once scanning, calculating, now fixed on a blank spot on the desk. She didn't reach for her notes. She didn't look at the chair. She didn't even adjust her microphone. She simply began to turn, ever so slightly away from the blinding glow of the cameras. But the red lights followed her, and the silence around her was no longer protective. It was damning. The woman who had spoken with such force hours earlier now had nothing left to say, because the room had already spoken for her. The chamber had never been this quiet, not even during the oath, not even when the accusations flew like daggers. What filled the room now wasn't silence in the passive sense. It was the kind that presses against your chest, that tightens every breath, that demands stillness. Pam Bondi had been broken without blood. Her allies had stepped away without a word. And Jasmine? She wasn't basking in triumph. She was rising into something else entirely. She stood slowly, one hand gripping the edge of the table, the other lifting the microphone with quiet care. The metal clink was soft but sharp in the dead silence. Her expression had shifted, no longer hard, no longer braced. What replaced it was something stronger, something deeper. Her face held warmth, but not forgiveness. Strength, but not defiance. What she carried now wasn't fire, but the smoke that remains after everything else burns away. Her voice broke through the tension, not like a crack of thunder, but like a match strike in a room full of gas. You thought angry was an insult, she began, her words measured, her tone unwavering. Her eyes scanned the room, not in challenge, but in reflection. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She was trying to make them see what they hadn't dared to. There was weight in how she said it, not because she was raising her voice, she wasn't, but because she had finally dropped the shield. There was no more performance, no armor, no strategy. Just truth, spoken without filter. Jasmine let the silence answer her first line before continuing, her voice still calm, but rising with something unshakable. But today, anger became awareness. Every syllable landed like a drumbeat. Anger became accountability. Someone exhaled across the room, audible and sharp. Anger is the sound justice makes when it knocks on this room's door. The last line didn't just echo, it settled. It hung there like heat. Not rage, not vengeance, but clarity, finality, a truth so bare that even those who had doubted her hours earlier now found themselves struggling to look away. She wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. She was calm because the fight had already ended, and she had won it without ever raising her fists. For a moment, no one moved. The microphones buzzed faintly in the stillness, but no one dared speak over her. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breathing didn't falter. She stood not like a politician, but like a woman who had just dragged the truth out of the shadows and left it pulsing in the light for all to see. And it was in that moment, quiet, brutal, sacred, that the first crack in the room appeared, not from an adversary, not from the press, but from a girl in the back row. She wore a navy blue blazer, 3 sizes too big, a congressional intern badge clipped crookedly to the lapel. She'd been taking notes all morning, head down, back straight, pretending she belonged there. But now, her pen had fallen from her grip. Her notebook sat open on her lap, blank. Her hand had gone to her mouth, and she was crying, not sobbing, not loudly, just silent tears running down her cheeks. Tears that had nothing to do with policy or party. They were tears of recognition, of release, of witnessing something she didn't expect to see in that room today. Someone telling the truth without needing it to be softened. She tried to wipe her face with the cuff of her sleeve, but it was too late. A camera caught her, but no one judged her. They couldn't, because she wasn't the only one. 2 rows behind her, a man in his mid-50s, press badge around his neck, NPR embroidered across his notepad, removed his earpiece with trembling fingers. He didn't cry, but his eyes were red. He stared at Jasmine like he was seeing something rare, maybe something sacred. His pen, which had been tapping relentlessly on his knee for the last hour, now lay still on the floor. He didn't bend down to retrieve it. He just let it sit there while his other hand rested against his temple, as if trying to process what he'd just heard. And still, Jasmine said nothing more. She didn't need to. That final line still reverberated, not just through the microphones, but through the floor, through the ribs of every person in the room who had spent too long mistaking anger for disruption instead of what it really was. Warning, righteousness, a final signal that something was wrong and could no longer be ignored. A senior staffer near the wall turned off her tablet. A security officer near the door uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. The chamber hadn't just listened, they had shifted. Something had been rearranged at a level deeper than applause. This wasn't a victory lap. This was a line in the sand. And Jasmine, she stood in it, quiet, resolute, unapologetically angry. Not because she had lost control, but because, for the first time in the hearing, she had taken all of it back. And just like that, the thunder faded, not into silence, but into something louder. History. The final gavel had long since dropped. The nameplate before Bondi's seat now sat cold and forgotten. Papers were left behind in a neat pile, as if formality could somehow clean up what had just happened. She rose slowly, her heels clicking across the marble like a clock running out. Staffers scrambled to catch up, but the tension had shifted. It no longer followed her. It avoided her. As she exited through the towering front doors, the media surged like a wave. Dozens of cameras snapped to life. Reporters braced their arms with microphones, ready for the kill. But something was off. No one spoke. No one shouted questions. The crowd simply watched. Bondi met them with forced composure, but her eyes darted nervously. Not one journalist dared to break the strange, heavy silence that cloaked the scene. She had expected noise. She got judgment. Her security flanked her on both sides, shielding her from a chaos that never came. The door of the black SUV opened. She stepped inside. The glass closed on her face like a lid. Not a word spoken, but her expression said enough. Gone was the confident crusader. What remained was a woman suddenly aware she'd been on the wrong side of something far bigger than herself. Halfway across the building, away from the chaos of the main entrance, a side door creaked open. No photographers stood there, no reporters, just soft wind brushing against the Capitol's limestone walls. Jasmine stepped into the open air, her body moving with quiet exhaustion. The fire inside her hadn't dimmed, but she carried it now like a weight instead of a weapon. Her steps were slow but not hesitant. They were the kind of steps taken by someone who had said everything that needed to be said. At the bottom of the steps, a girl waited. She was maybe 14, small frame, thin shoulders. A navy hoodie swallowed her figure, the sleeves too long. She held a cardboard sign to her chest with both hands. Her knees shook slightly, but her eyes didn't. She stood like someone who had held this position for hours, not because anyone told her to, but because something deep inside said she had to. Jasmine's eyes caught the sign first. The handwriting was messy, the marker thick, the message raw. "I will be the next angry girl from Texas." Jasmine stopped. The girl didn't speak. She just stared, her lips tight, her hands trembling slightly as the sign fluttered in the breeze. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a selfie moment. It was a declaration, a private one. One meant only for Jasmine, and yet one the whole world would soon see. Jasmine stepped forward, slowly, as if not to scare her. Her face softened as she reached out, not for the sign, but for the girl's hand. Fingers met. The girl gasped softly, her breath catching as Jasmine bent slightly, leaning closer. Then Jasmine spoke, not to the press, not to Congress, but to her. "Then make sure they never use your own voice to silence you." The girl's lip trembled, but her grip didn't. Flash, flash, flash. No one had seen them approach. No one had called for a pose. But somewhere behind a low garden wall, a photographer captured it. Not a PR shot, not a headline grabber. Just the raw moment. Two hands, two generations, one vow passed like a flame. The sound of the shutter kept clicking. Jasmine didn't turn. She didn't need to. The message had already left her mouth and landed exactly where it needed to. For a full 5 seconds, nothing else existed. Not the cameras, not the Capitol behind them, not even the storm still brewing in Washington's air. Just two hands locked in a grip that neither wanted to let go. Jasmine knew what this girl saw in her, but what hit harder was what she saw in the girl. Fire, anger, focus, but also something she herself hadn't had at that age. Permission. Permission to speak. Permission to burn. Permission to not apologize. A security officer approached from the rear, slowing his steps when he noticed the moment unfolding. He didn't interrupt. He just stood back, shoulders squared, watching. Even he knew not to interfere with history in real time. Jasmine finally pulled back, just slightly. The girl nodded once. No words. She didn't need any. Her eyes were louder than a crowd. Jasmine gave her one last glance and walked down the path toward the waiting car. She didn't look back, because some moments are meant to be passed forward, not relived. And some stories like this one were no longer hers alone. By dawn the next morning, that photo was everywhere. Two hands clasped in solidarity. Jasmine's jacket sleeve, crisp against the girl's oversized hoodie. The sign visible, just enough for the world to read it. "I will be the next angry girl from Texas." No filters, no captions, just truth. It appeared first on Twitter, then Instagram. Then it hit the New York Times front page above the fold. CNN aired it with no commentary. Fox tried to avoid it, but couldn't. Threads of women posted their own versions. Hashtags were born overnight. But the photo didn't trend because it was clever. It didn't explode because it was planned. It caught fire because it was real. Because after weeks of noise, hearings, edits, spin rooms, and lawyers, this was the one moment no one could deny. By 8 a.m., classrooms from Dallas to Detroit were printing the image. Teachers used it to ask their students what it meant to be heard. Civil rights groups framed it. A mural went up in Austin by noon. The artist painted the girl's eyes so vividly, drivers slowed down at the corner just to look. Inside the Capitol, aides passed each other silently in hallways. No one mentioned it directly, but everyone knew. Jasmine's name didn't even need to be said anymore. Her words had etched themselves into the walls. And as for the girl in the photo, she returned to school the next day. Her classmates stared. Her teacher called her brave, but she didn't say much. Just sat down at her desk, opened a blank notebook, and wrote on the first page, "Don't let them take your voice." Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.